Would you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background in mining?
I'm Martin Hannifan, former manager of the operations in Montana back in the late 60s up until about 1972. I was born and raised in Nevada. My father was a miner. Had worked in Marcus Daly's mines in 1900 to 1903. He was single at the time. In 1903, when Daly shut down all his mines, I guess to influence the Hansi legal problems, he moved over to Nevada and went to work in Goldfield, which was a silver mine booming at the time. Unfortunately, while there, they opened up for homesteading in the Fallon area, which is 60 miles south of Reno. And he took up a homestead there, brought his bride out from Springfield, who was also an Irish immigrant, and made a farm and made a living there on some 80 or 100 acres in the Fallon area while I was growing up. I went to the University of Nevada, Reno. I flipped a coin between electrical engineering and mining engineering because that was the two best departments I had. The coin came down mining. My father told me I was crazy because he had lived and worked as a miner, a single jacket in the mine, hard, difficult work under conditions that were much more difficult than they are now for ventilation and all the things that have been done. So anyhow, I graduated with a bachelor's in mining engineering, Mackey School of Mines, Reno. And again, this now remember is 1939. I got out of high school in 1932, so they talked about the baby boom. I was a depression kid. Got out of high school and there were no jobs around. I worked for 3 years in highway construction to try to earn enough money for college. I got out of college while there was only one company interviewed us for jobs, and that was Ingersoll Rand looking for salesmen. So I took the next best friend of mine invited me to come down to his home in Trona, California. His father was manager of the Trona Borage Works. It's in the Mojave Desert, and this was July. I took a job loading potash bags in boxcars at the Trona Borage Works until I could find something more to my liking. You want to answer that?
No, I want to turn that off. Hang on.
School conveyor bringing hot potash bags in and stacked them in the end.
Okay, go ahead.
But I was in good shape in those days and that's who I. But then I got a call to go as a sampler at the Walker Mine near Portola, California, which was an Anaconda subsidiary. And when I went to Walker Mine, I was like going to heaven because it was up in the pine trees, nice and cool, and the job was in my field. And the people that ran it, Jack Warren, his last name was Warren, he was a Butte mine trained superintendent. And Red Druby was the chief engineer, and he too was worked for Anaconda in various places, Jerome, Arizona. So there were a good young bunch of people to work with and for, and I learned quite a bit. And then I got a call from the Anaconda company if I wanted to take the job, I could go to their Andes copper mine in South America, Chile. And I was delighted to do so.
When was that you went to Chile? When? What year?
The year I went to Chile was January 1940. And as I say, this was an Anaconda company mine. And the reason I was able to get the job was again through the friend whose father was manager at the Toronto Borax Works, had been at Andes previously as assistant manager. And I was able to, there were very little turnover. Remember, this is the tail end of the Depression. The Depression never got over until the war broke out and started cranking up everything. So anyhow, I started out as a safety engineer in the Chilean mine, had to learn Spanish on the job. It was an interesting experience, but the Chileans are good people, very ambitious, very intelligent, and very courteous to their foreign bosses. So I made many good friends down there. I got married in 1945 to my wife, who was a school teacher in Ely, Nevada, close friend of my sister's, and I brought her down in 1945 to Chile, where we were married, Santiago. So we were about 2.5, 3 years, had one child born down there. I developed a bleeding duodenal ulcer problem and was told by the doctors to get out from under the pressure and the altitude and so forth. So I came back to my father's ranch in Nevada and stayed there about 3 years, and then I was offered a job as safety engineer at the Calavera cement plant in California near San Andreas. Now again, this was a nephew of the man who got me the first job in Chile. He too had worked for him. Hip Barker, real nice fellow, and treated me well at Calavera Cement, leased a lot of land that they had for limestone. So I was able to move my cattle down to Nevada, and I was farming and mining at the same time. And was reluctant to leave, actually, when I got a call from Ed Malone. This would be beginning around October, no, mid-1951.
How did you know him?
Pardon?
Did you meet Ed McGlone in Chile?
No, I never knew the man until but I had met Charles Winkeroff and Dick Newland, Clyde Weed, and most of the hierarchy in New York had traveled to Chile while I was there. And, in the meantime, during my illness, I wrote a thesis on block cave mining as related to the Andes copper mine, and got my professional degree from the University of Nevada, Reno, through the thesis and the work that I had done in the profession. So that too, I guess, was one of the reasons I got the call from McGlone to come for an interview to manage the Greater Butte project. So, reluctantly, as I say, we were very happy where we were in San Andreas, and I came up to Butte promising my wife I probably wouldn't take the job. And as I came over the hill at Monida in the train and looked out the window and saw a herd of elk, and a little while later some antelope, I thought, boy, this is the place for me. I've been stuck in the desert all my life. I love hunting, fishing, trees and mountains. So I was pretty well convinced even before I talked to McGlone and visited and went through the mines to see what the situation was like. So anyhow, I accepted the job and came up here in November 1951, middle of a snowstorm. Had 3 children at the time. The youngest was about 3 months old and not well at the moment, had sinus infection. So we wound up at Lloyd's Motel down here looking out on those manganese dumps. As our first arrival in Butte, and my wife almost cried and she said, what are we doing this for? But it all worked out, and the people that I went to work for was certainly helpful. Clark Bigley, Ed Renwell, McGlone shortly after was offered the job in New York, and when he was leaving for New York, he offered me the house, the company house that he was leaving. which was-
In the Heights?
It was the last house in Dublin Gulch.
Oh, Renwa's
Oh,
house.
The Heights was only the building at that time.
Right.
Now, he was living in what they call the Rimmer O'Neill house. There were about 4 or 5 houses. As you go up Anaconda Road, turn right through a gate towards the Never Swept Mine and the Anaconda Mines headframes. There's a road that went up in there, about 4 houses in that area. Turcos had one of them, I forgot who the others were. But I had the last house at the top of the hill, next to, right behind the Anaconda shaft, and which had been pretty much burned down just about the time I moved up there. The carpenter shop had caught fire. But the big central heating plant was up there, the big Montana Power distribution was up there, the central compressor plant was there, 200 yards of it. And it was an interesting place to live. And of course I realized I couldn't stay there very long because I was going to mine myself out. And I finally did. I moved out in 1962 to a home we had built down near the airport.